Okay, so what we're going to cover in this video is the first part of the Datagrid example that we went through in class. So to get started, what you need to do is create a new project, and you need to make sure that you select Windows Forms application. Excuse me, again, make sure that that C# has been selected and that the Windows option has been selected underneath that. So just select a Windows Forms template, and then I'm going to call this data grid view 1, and then just select where you want to store it. So you can select anywhere like the desktop or something like that. Okay, so then select OK. And so with the Windows Forms application, what you get by default is you get a form1.cs file, and in this form1.cs file there's a little bit of code. So if we were to look here, this is effectively what we get for free when we create a Windows Forms application. You get a kind of a basic template for creating Windows Forms applications. The first one that it creates is called Form1. You can change the name of that if you wish, but for the moment I'm going to leave it at Form1. Over on the left hand side you'll see the toolbox, and you'll see all the different controls that you can create or add to your Windows Forms application. And if you want, you can also do a search for one. So if I wanted to search for a button, you see I can select a button. Over on the right hand side where the project is, the project is associated with a solution, and within the project there's a section called properties and references. We're not going to deal too much with them for the moment. There's also a section for a file called an app.config file, and again we're not going to look at that for the moment. And then we've got two files underneath that, one called form1.cs and one called program.cs. So program.cs is the one that we've historically been using in Object-Oriented Programming 1 and in Principles of Programming. But form1.cs is where we're really going to focus in on now. So if you click the little arrow icon beside form1, what you'll see is that there are some files underneath it. So this form1.designer.cs file and this form1.cs file, they're actually trying to define the exact same class. And the reason for that is that the code that's in the designer file, the form1.designer file, is a little bit too low level for the day-to-day use that a developer would normally have to perform. So they've kind of subcontracted that out to a separate file, but the two files effectively are defining the same class file, and that's when we were talking about partial files. So if we open this form1.designer, you'll see over here the word partial. And what the partial word does is it just says that this form1 class is partially, it's not fully implemented here, but it's partially implemented here. Again, going back to form1.cs, just the main part of the code. Right clicking on viewing code there, what you'll see in here is that there's also another partial class called form1, and it inherits from form. And what this means is that the code in this particular file in form1.cs will be merged with the code in form1.designer.cs when we compile the code. Okay, so going back over to our solution, one thing you'll have noticed is that when I right clicked, I had two options. One was to view the code and one was to view the designer. When you select the designer, you get the kind of what you see is what you get display. So you basically see your Windows Forms as it would be rendered to a user using your application. So that's in the designer view. Also up in the top up here, you'll see that it's got square brackets design. When you see that, that means you're in the what you see is what you get version of the code. Then you also see that there's a form1.cs file. That's the code behind file. That's the real code that's doing something. So there's kind of two windows that you have to have your mindset in. So one is that you might be doing the design of the application, so then you select the design view where you see this kind of graphical interface, and then the other one would be where you're thinking about the code that's going to trigger some sort of a scenario, or is going to perform some task against the operating system, for example, opening a file or something. So when you're doing that kind of stuff, you need to come into the code file here. So there's a front end and a back end of the code. Okay, so what we're going to do for part one is we need to add a menu item to, or menu strip to the application. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put into the text box for the toolbox, the search area, I'm going to type in the word menu, and you'll see menu strip will come up. Okay, so you just have to select that and then drag it over into Form 1 and just release it again there. And what you'll notice is that it adds this kind of little ribbon to the top of your application, and then down at the bottom you'll see that it adds in something called a menu strip 1 icon here. So this is basically our way of referencing that particular menu from the code perspective. So if we want to change something in the menu, if we want to add something to the menu or hide something from the menu, we'll gain access to it from a C# point of view using this reference. So by default, Visual Studio will always will always kind of associate default names with your controls. So it can be better sometimes to rename these to something more meaningful for yourself. So for this particular example, I'm going to right click here and I'm going to go to Properties, and over in Properties what you'll see are all the different types of properties associated with a menu. So you can set the name, which is what we're going to change next, but you could also select the background color, the background image, and so on and so forth. So for the name, I just want to change it from menu strip 1 to just menu, and that's that. And now that means in the code behind, if I ever want to do something with the menu, I just reference it using the word menu. Going into the designer, just to show you what has happened in there, you'll see that this code here has been added to the designer. So this is the form1.designer code. It's added in a variable called menu, which is the name I gave it, and its data type is menu strip. And then if you click on the plus symbol where it says Windows Form Designer Code, you'll see that there's a little bit of code added in there too. So there's this section here saying that where the location of this menu is, what size the menu is, what the tab index is, what the text of it is, and what the name of it is. So next thing we want to do is add in a data grid view. So I'm going to type in data, and you can see that it's filtered it down to the data grid view, and I'm going to select that, drag it across, and release it on my Windows form. What you'll notice is that it gives you this kind of a follow-on kind of option to add columns or edit columns or choose the data source. For the moment you don't need to worry about that. We won't interact with that too much in the course. So what I would suggest you do is just hit the escape key on the keyboard, and that'll just vanish. So now what we have is our data grid view on our Windows Form application. So I just kind of want to position that in a little bit more center part of the application. So I'm just using the little squares to pull it around, to extend its size and to expand it. So now we have our data grid view, and just like when we added our menu, we changed the name of the menu, we're going to do the same thing for a data grid view. Just to note as well that down at the bottom you won't see any reference to data grid view there. That's because data grid view isn't actually a hidden control, it's a visible control. So right click on the data grid view and go to properties, and then over in properties you'll see that there's a data grid view 1, and so what I suggest you do is just rename that to DGV, and that means now that if we want to gain access to our data grid view at a later stage from the code perspective, we can using the variable name DGV. And again, come back into the designer code, so the form1.designer.cs. What you'll notice in there is that the data grid view code has been added to this section as well. Okay, so I'm going to just save all that and go back to my design view, so my kind of nice view here. And the last thing I want to do in this part of the exercise is just add in the names of the menu items. So the first one we want to add in is the word file, so that's going to be appearing up in the top, and then when someone selects that, we'll want to show add, we'll want to show edit, we'll want to show delete, and lastly we'll want to show view. And so we're just typing in these menus at the moment. We're not actually providing the code behind the scenes yet to take advantage of what the user has just selected. So for the moment we're just adding in the fact that these menus will exist, but we're not generating any code based on it just yet. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Then when you want to go and run your application, you'll see that what we saw over in the design view will appear as part of the application. So here you can see my form 1, you can see my data grid view, there's nothing in it at the moment, and then you can see I can select file, add, edit, delete, and view. And so nothing happens when I click on those just yet. Okay, so that's pretty much part 1 of the exercise done. What we're going to do next is go into part 2.